closer. Our Prime Minister's clarifications on Friday night that this has nothing to do with Greece staying in the Eurozone or not played a major role in this result.
The Greek government has said it wants to be in talks with international lenders immediately to try to negotiate a new bailout agreement. French officials said that President François Hollande is to meet the German Chancellor Angela Merkel in Paris on Monday evening to consider the consequences of the referendum result. But what would happen if there wasn't a deal? Here's our Europe correspondent Chris Morris in Athens.
What could happen is that Greece would technically remain part of the Eurozone, but if no further funding came in here, it would have to in effect introduce a parallel currency to keep things going. Greece doesn't actually leave the Eurozone, but its membership is in effect suspended. It introduces a parallel currency which allows it to devalue to some extent and perhaps get the economy back to growth. The aim of that will be, at some stage in the future, to bring Greece back in. Is that a possibility? Frankly, nobody knows, because that really would be territory that we haven't dealt with before.
Chris Morris. The Greek Finance Minister, Yanis Varoufakis, will hold an emergency meeting with officials from the Bank of Greece once the result of the referendum is confirmed. Officials have already said that without a deal, the banks will start running out of money within days, despite a week of restrictions. There's been mixed reaction to the partial results from Greece. A senior German Conservative politician, Hans Nickelbach, said Greece had chosen a path of isolation. In Spain, a member of parliament for the anti-austerity party Podemos said it would give more negotiating power to the Greek government. You're listening to World News, coming to you from the BBC. The American Secretary of State John Kerry has said discussions on Iran's nuclear program have made genuine progress, but a deal is not yet certain. Negotiators from 6 world powers have been involved in a final push to try to secure an agreement by Tuesday. The EU's foreign policy chief, Federica Mogherini, is also at the talks in Vienna.
We are in the last mile of the marathon, and we have the conditions for getting there. And if we are ready to have a deal, if a deal is possible, it's now. We are very close.
Burundi has rejected a second diplomat appointed by the United Nations to try to resolve the country's political crisis. The governing party said the mediator, Abdoulaye Bouteflika, who was appointed last month, was biased. The two lion cubs rescued from the Gaza Strip are on their way to a wildlife sanctuary in Jordan. The pair, called Max and Mona, were being looked after by a family in the town of Rafah. Alan Johnston reports.
The two cubs began life in a zoo in southern Gaza, but it was damaged during fighting last year, and Max and Mona were to be sold. They were bought by a family that kept them in a small house in a refugee camp. But they were worried that the growing lions would soon become dangerous, and so a British animal charity has arranged to transport them to a better home in Jordan.
Alan Johnston. The youngest member of the British royal family, Princess Charlotte, has been christened at Queen Elizabeth's Sandringham Estate in the county of Norfolk. Well wishes greeted Prince William and his wife, the Duchess of Cambridge, as they walked to the church with their children. The baptism was conducted by the Archbishop of Canterbury, the head of the worldwide Anglican Communion, using water from the River Jordan. BBC News.
Hello, this is the History Hour with Max Pearson. This week, the Berlin Love Parade, the blind, deaf and defiant Helen Keller, and Jaws. But for our first item, we have another extraordinary and moving recollection of life under the Nazis during the Second World War. The concentration camps and extermination camps set up by Hitler's regime to contain and eradicate the Jewish populations of Europe have gone down in history as examples of the worst of crimes. But remarkably, in the summer of 1944, the Germans had become sensitive about the negative propaganda generated as news of the camps seeped out. So they allowed a delegation from the International Red Cross into the concentration camp at Terezin, also known as Theresienstadt, in Czechoslovakia. The Nazis tried to use the visit to project a positive image of their treatment of the Jews. Mike Lanchin has been speaking to Ella Weisberger, who was an 11-year-old girl in Terezin at the time.
grainy black and white Nazi propaganda film made in 1944, a group of young Jewish children can be seen singing to an audience of fellow prisoners in the Terezin concentration camp. Their innocent faces and their clear, strong voices are a terrible contrast to the brutal reality that surrounds them. Ella Weisberger was just 11 years old when she sang alongside the other children at the camp. The piece they were performing was a Czech children's opera about two little children and their animal friends who overcome a wicked organ grinder called Brundibar.
Brundibar poražen in our imagination. Brundibar was for us Hitler, and one day we will overcome him. The audience, when we started to sing, they would clap and they would sing with us. It was a time that we really felt free.
But neither the children nor the prisoners in the audience were free. The fortress town of Terezin, or Theresienstadt, in northwestern Czechoslovakia, was used by the Nazis as a ghetto and concentration camp for tens of thousands of Czech, Danish and Dutch Jews. It was also a transit camp to Nazi extermination camps elsewhere in occupied Europe. Ella, a Czech Jew, arrived there in February 1942 with her extended family.
My uncle, my grandmother, my mother, my sister and myself, we were taken to the train and the people were watching us yelling, you know, "You Jew, get out of Prague." We were taken 1,400 people.
When you were in Terezin, did you feel very scared all the time, or did you think about what was happening around you?
One day they took us out from the barrack to show us 9 young people were punished and hung, and they let them hang for a whole week. And they said to us kids, if you will do what those people did, you will be there too. You couldn't believe it, that a human being can do that. And this was something that, you know, you can't forget it.
It was a regime of brutality, disease and forced labour. But the prisoners in Terezin responded with incredible resilience. The camp held some of Prague's leading Jewish artists, writers and intellectuals who organised schools, sports activities, even theatre and concerts, all in an effort to maintain some semblance of dignity. In the summer of 1943, one Terezin prisoner, the Czech composer Hans Krasa, began organising performances of Brundibar, the children's opera he'd written before the war and then smuggled into the camp. Ella was chosen to play the part of the cat. She took part in more than 50 performances at the camp's makeshift theatre. Even some of Hitler's most senior officers came to see it.
The very famous Eichmann was many times in the camp. All those very high officers from Berlin came. We had a dressing room, so we undressed into our so-called costume and were waiting till the Nazis came in. And then when we were singing the lullaby, what is very sad, even the melody is very lovely melody. So they took off their hats and they sat down and they were looking at us kids. the moment that we walked on stage, this was the only time we didn't have to wear the Jewish garment.
By the beginning of 1944, the war was turning against the Nazis. They were now anxious to dispel rumours about the mass murder of Jews in their death camps. And so they decided to allow a delegation from the International and Danish Red Cross to visit Terezin, to witness what the Nazis wished to portray as a model Jewish settlement. But first, they had to make the camp ready for the visit.
They started to ship people out of Terezin. Every other day, 7,000 people were shipped out. It was a big preparation for it. There were certain areas where they started to put curtains in the windows, and they even were giving out sheets, to make working clothes or whatever.
The International Red Cross delegates arrived in Terezin on June 23rd, 1944. They spent most of the day there, walking through the cleaned-up streets and looking into the newly painted houses. But their contact with prisoners was strictly controlled.
They were taking them only in those streets that everything was prepared. And children were given, piece of bread with margarine, and till they didn't pass, the children were not allowed to bite into the bread. They didn't take them all the bad places where hundreds of people were in one room in the barracks,
What do you remember of that day when they came?
I was that time involved with the Brundiba, so I was in a different area. We had to stay there whole day and waiting for the minute that they were coming close, that we should be prepared and, in time to start to sing. We were not happy to perform for them, but maybe it saved some lives.
The Nazis were convinced that the Red Cross visit had been a success and went on to produce a propaganda film about Terezin. They called it the